Across the vast and varied landscapes of Africa, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the floodplains of the Niger Delta, from the savannas of East Africa to the coastal cities of the West, the climate is shifting. These changes are not just meteorological, they are deeply personal, shaping the lives and livelihood of over 1 billion people. Droughts last longer, rains come unseasonably, and floods uproot entire communities. Climate change in Africa is no longer a future possibility. It is a daily reality that threatens the very essence of life, ranging from food, shelter, water, security. Yet, the continent contributes a mere 3.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, according to Global Carbon Atlas, highlighting a tragic imbalance between responsibility and vulnerability. Despite this injustice, the continent's climate resilience is hamstrung not by lack of ideas or determination, but by a staggering shortfall of climate finance. The African Development Bank, AFDB, estimates that the continent needs up to $277 billion annually by 2030 to meet its climate goals under the Paris Agreement. However, actual flows of climate finance to Africa are woefully inadequate, amounting to just $30 billion in 2020, with less than 3% of global climate finance directed to the region, according to Climate Policy Initiative 2022. This massive gap in funding is not just a threat to adaptation efforts, but a silent verdict against millions of futures that hang in the balance. Historically, climate finance has been shaped by multilateral donors, development banks, and philanthropic funds. While critical, these sources have proven slow, overly risk-averse, and at times disconnected from the local needs. For African countries with limited fiscal space, high debt burdens, and fragile institutional frameworks, relying solely on public and concessional finance is insufficient. What is desperately needed is a new force in the climate finance ecosystems, one that is nimble, motivated, and embedded within local economies. That force is the African private sector. The private sector in Africa is often misunderstood and seen either through the lens of large extractive industries or fragmented informal markets. Yet, between these extremes lies a vibrant emerging engine of innovation, homegrown startups, family-run agribusiness, fintech companies, solar energy providers, and lots more. These actors already understood the risk posed by climate change because they live with them. For a cassava processor in Nigeria, erratic weather means reduced harvest and unpredictable supply chains. For a mobile payments company in Kenya, floods can damage infrastructure and disrupt customer engagement. Climate vulnerability is not abstract, it is immediate and measurable in profit and loss. More importantly, these businesses are uniquely positioned to act. Private capital, when properly mobilized, can fund clean energy projects, scale climate-smart agriculture, develop resilient infrastructure, and create jobs aligned with a low-carbon future. According to the International Finance Corporation, IFC, private sector investment could cover up to 85% of climate-related infrastructure needs in developing countries, provided the right policies and financial instruments are in place. In Africa, this potential remains largely untapped, not for lack of will, but for want of enabling structures. Across the continent, there are early signs of this potential taking root. In Kenya, M-Copper has pioneered a pay-as-you-go solar home system model that has connected over 1 million households to off-grid electricity. Many of them in rural areas previously reliant on kerosene or diesel. The business combines mobile money technology, microfinance, and renewable energy in a scalable, market-driven solution. In Nigeria, all-on and off-grid energy implant investment company backed by Shell has invested in dozens of clean energy startups, helping bring power to communities outside the national grid. These initiatives not only reduce emissions, but also create jobs, improve heat outcomes, and support education. They are climate finance in action, not as aid, but as enterprise. The private sector's contribution goes beyond direct investment. It also plays a catalytic role by de-risking projects and attracting other forms of capital. Through blended finance, structures that combine concessional and commercial funds, private firms can absorb initial losses or lower return expectations, thereby encouraging traditional investors to engage. For every $1 of concessional capital mobilized via blended finance, up to $4 of private investment can be unlocked, according to the OECD 2020. These mechanisms, if scaled, can help bridge the climate finance gap while maintaining financial sustainability. Moreover, the private sector brings something equally vital: innovation. While donor-led projects often emphasize compliance and risk minimization, businesses are wired to experiment, iterate, and scale quickly. They can deploy AI to predict drought patterns, blockchain to trace green supply chains, or mobile platforms to deliver micro-insurance for farmers. In Senegal, for example, the startup Jokalante uses SMS to deliver climate and market information to rural farmers, helping them adapt to shifting weather patterns while improving yields. Innovation is not a luxury in Africa. It is a necessity born of a constraint. Yet, this potential cannot be realized in a vacuum. The transformation of the African private sector into a driver of climate finance requires a deliberate and coordinated effort. First, governments must create an enabling policy environment that encourages green investment. This includes tax incentives for clean energy, enforceable regulations for emissions and pollution, and stable procurement frameworks that allow private companies to sell power back to the grid. Policy clarity reduces investor uncertainty and builds long-term confidence. Second, access to finance must be democratized. African small and medium-sized enterprises face chronic barriers to credit, such as high interest rates, lack of collateral, and short loan tenures. Climate finance instruments such as green bonds, climate credit guarantee schemes, and concessional lending windows tailored for SMEs can help bridge this gap. In South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange launched its green bond segment to encourage private capital flows into sustainable infrastructure, an initiative that could be replicated across the continent with support from regional financial institutions. Third, capacity must be built not just within companies but across ecosystems. Entrepreneurs need training to develop bankable green projects. Financial institutions require tools to evaluate environmental risk and opportunities. Regulators must be equipped to set and enforce climate standards. Climate finance literacy must become mainstream, integrated into business schools, public service curricula, and even high school education. Fourth, public-private collaboration must deepen. Trust between African government and businesses is often fragile, shaped by years of regulatory unpredictability and opaque deal-making. Building inclusive platforms where both sides co-create climate solutions is essential. These platforms can facilitate joint investment in climate-resilient infrastructure, enable data sharing, and align national climate plans with business strategies. The African Green Stimulus Program and the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFCFTA) present unique opportunities for such alignment at scale. Lastly, climate finance must be inclusive. Women-led businesses, youth entrepreneurs, and informal sector actors are often excluded from mainstream finance, but are central to climate resilience. According to United Nations Women, women make up over 70% of the agricultural workforce in sub-Saharan Africa, yet they receive less than 10% of available credit. Climate finance that overlooks gender and social equity will fail to reach those most affected by climate change and miss out on their ingenuity and resilience. There is a moral and strategic imperative to act. Africa is home to the youngest population in the world, with over 60% under the age of 25. The choices made in the next decade will define whether this generation will grow up in a world of cascading climate crisis or one of green opportunity and renewal. The African private sector is not a bystander in the story. It is a protagonist with the power to transform the narrative. The path forward is not easy, but it is urgent. It demands courage from CEOs to pivot towards sustainability, boldness from investors to look beyond the traditional markets, and vision from policymakers to support this transition. And above all, it requires faith in African ingenuity, in shared prosperity, and in the idea that those closest to the problem are often closest to the solution. Climate finance in Africa must not remain a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It must become a movement led from within, driven by businesses that see not just the risk, but purpose in climate action. Only then can we build a future where finance flows not only towards returns, but towards resilience, justice, and life itself.